Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar about the Delsys API integration into Qualysys Track Manager 2021.2. My name is Niels Betzler. I'm Product Manager Life Sciences at Qualysys, and our objective today is to show you how to use the latest integration for Delsys EMG in the latest release of our QTM software. And for that reason, I'm really happy to welcome Steven Lindley here in the webinar. Hi, Steven.
Hi, Niels. Thank you for inviting me. It's nice to see you again.
Yeah, great. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Sure. So my name's Steven Lindley. I work for Delsys, primarily over here in Europe, from our offices in Manchester in the UK. And my own background is I have a PhD in neuromuscular biomechanics and really a love and desire towards EMG and their various technologies. And so I'm calling from Delsys, and we are designers, manufacturers of high fidelity EMG technologies. And we've had a long-standing relationship with you at Qualysys, where we have our integration of our products and technologies. And so today we're really happy to be able to show some of the latest offerings that we have with integration into QTM.
Great. Thank you, Steven. So I'll bring up our outline for today. So first, we'll take a quick look at what Qualysys products actually are and what the Delsys API integration is and why we set out to implement it. Then I will hand over to Steven, who will talk about Delsys products and what is required for the new integration. Then Steven will also show us the hardware setup. And then we'll take a look at what hardware and software is supported with the integration. And we then move on to a live demonstration of the whole setup. Take a look at available resources for you to learn more about the integration and about how to use the two systems together. And at the end, we try to make sure to have plenty of time for your questions. And for that, you just click on the Q&A icon at the bottom of the Zoom window. And in there, you can just type questions. You can select to stay anonymous, or you can include your name. And the name will only become visible when we answer your question. Of course, it's generally a good thing for us to have the name, because if there are follow-up questions, then we can get in touch with you. But of course, it's also perfectly fine if you tick the box to ask anonymous questions. The session is being recorded, and it will be shared afterwards. If you want to re-watch it afterwards or share with colleagues, we'll send you an email and let you know when the recording is ready within the next days. And then it will be just available on the same page where you signed up for today. Okay, so I'll stop sharing here for a moment and show you a little bit where I am and what we do today. I'm in our mocap studio in Gothenburg, where we have a full mocap system, the mix of Arcus and Arcus and Ocus cameras up here. You can't see all of them. Some of them are cut off at the top, but it's a full setup to allow us to track even quite small markers in this volume. And if you look carefully at my arm, you can see we've already prepared a few things here. We'll get back to that in a few minutes. So this is just a little teaser. So we'll be tracking finger muscles today. Okay, so I would like to explain a little bit more when we talk about the Delsys API integration, what we actually mean by this and why we set out to do it. So we've had a Delsys SDK integration for many years, and you will see throughout the day today that we have set out to create a new API integration using the latest sort of connector. That's what the API is, the latest connector between the Delsys hardware and software and the QTM hardware and software to be able to provide some new functionality and support new sensors. Okay, so more on that later. With that, I'll hand over to Steven to introduce Delsys.
Thank you, Niels. So let me show you now on our overhead camera a little bit more about the Delsys products, and particularly so the Delsys Trinio system that maybe some of you either have in your labs or have seen around before. The Delsys Trinio system was released back in 2008, and since then, where we had just a single channel of EMG and an accelerometer sensor, we now have evolved this platform to be able to support a whole range of different sensor types, to be able to collect multiple channels of EMG and IMU and other biomechanical and physiological data. The Trinio system can be seen here on the camera, whereby it's a base station where we house and charge our sensors, and also, of course, comprised of the actual sensors themselves. So on show today, we've got our standard Trinio Avanti sensors, and we're also going to show the Trinio Quattro sensor. So we'll speak a little bit more about the Avanti sensor quickly. The Avanti sensor is perhaps seen as our standard sensor. So there are no cables attached to this sensor. The EMG electrodes are on the rear of the sensor next to our reference electrodes. We apply this to the surface of a muscle on the skin using some double-sided adhesive. Now, what we've also been working with over the years is evolving our EMG technologies to provide users with different ways to collect EMG data. And in particular, so the Trinio Quattro sensor is what we're going to be highlighting today. The Quattro sensor still has the same main body as your Avanti and previous generations of Trinio sensors. And so they're all compatible with existing Trinio base stations. But in this case, we have these miniature heads to collect EMG data. The intra-electrode spacing is still the same as the Avanti at 10 millimeters, but it offers users a different method to collect EMG because of its smaller head and its lightweight, sort of low profile nature. So back in the summer, Delsys and Delsys did a demonstration showing how we could look at tracking facial movements and facial EMG. And today's example is what Niels just gave you a quick tease of, is we're going to look at tracking of the fingers and of the hand. And at the same time, looking at intrinsic hand muscles and wrist muscles by studying the forearm muscles. So this is the Trinio system in its sort of simplest sense, I suppose. And what we're going to show in a moment is a bit more about the hardware setup and how we can connect the Delsys system together, along with the Qualys system as well.
Perfect.
So before that, we're going to go into having a look at what hardware is supported and what we need to sort of get going on the Qualys side and what we need from a Delsys perspective as well.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Steven. So let's take a look at how we support the new integration in Qualys Track Manager. So what do you need from the Qualys side to run this? Basically, we have implemented this new integration in Qualys Track Manager 2021.2. And that version has been released, I think, just a few weeks ago. And I think within the next week or so, if you're using an older version of Qualys Track Manager, you will get a message asking you if you want to update to that version. And it includes various improvements and new features, but one of the main things we've done is to sort of add this new API integration for Delsys. But having said that, I mean, this version is a standard version. It's not anything special, and it is compatible with any combination of Arcus, Micus, and Ocus cameras. And I'm aware that many of you probably have Ocus systems and run Ocus systems because that has been our main camera platform for many years until we replaced it with a new Arcus platform. And for that reason, I would like to highlight here that you can connect Ocus cameras all in one chain. You can connect Arcus and Micus cameras together in a long chain and mix them in any way that you would like because they use the same type of connectors. And if you are, for example, adding Arcus cameras to an Ocus system, you can combine those two cable types simply with a standard Ethernet switch that we can provide. And you can then connect this to the computer. So from that side, this integration doesn't really have very special requirements. You will see that you also require a camera sync unit to ensure the synchronization of the signal. But other than that, there are no constraints, and you have all possibilities to combine this with various other types of hardware, like force plates, for example, or even eye trackers that you can all connect to the Qualys software. All right, then let's take a look at requirements from the Delsys side, Steven.
So from a Delsys perspective, we're going to start on the left-hand side to begin with here on the slide with the API integration, so our new integration with QTM. All Trinio base stations are compatible with the new API integration. It does require that any existing base stations and new base stations at that point should be on the latest available firmware. So that is 2919, a longer string of numbers. Also, the API integration will support only Trinio Avanti style sensors. So these can be characterized by the lack of button compared to the legacy sensors and the large LED on there. But importantly now, this also supports not just Trinio Avanti, but our multi-channel sensors, such as the Trinio Duo and the Trinio Quattro sensor type as well. These sensors need to be on at least 4044, but also ideally, the latest firmware is 4049, which you can be compatible and upgrade to. Another element which may be new to a lot of users is the element of Trinio USB drivers. And these require the 32-bit Trino USB drivers. And so these are automatically installed when you plug a base station into a Trino system. And so there shouldn't be too much concern here. However, the latest Delsys software does install 64-bit Trino USB drivers to be compatible. And so if you are using different technologies and different software platforms, it may be something to consider, have a look at some of our resources, or reach out to one of us in support to make sure that we've ticked all the boxes here for compatibility. On the right-hand side of the slide, you'll see about the SDK integration. As Neil said, we've had this for probably 6 or 7 years now, and this will be characterized by using the Trino Control Utility software from Delsys. This still also supports all Trino base stations and currently supports the firmware version of 2909 with a future upgrade that will also support 2919 as well. For the SDK integration, this is where we support the Trino legacy style sensors. So these are the ones with the raised arrow on the front of the sensor with the small LED and the push button on the front of the sensor. This is what we describe as our legacy style sensors. We still also support the Trino Avanti sensors within our SDK integration with QTM, but it doesn't include the multi-channel sensors that we're showing today, such as the Trino Quattro or the Trino Duo, or perhaps other future iterations of Trino sensors as we step forward. Firmware, as before, is also on the sensors. So for Trino legacy style sensors, the firmware should be 3018, and the Trino Avanti should be 4044 currently. And it's still the same 32-bit Trino USB drivers that are required. At the end of the presentation today, then Nils and I will show you some of the resources that are available to guide you as a user through some of these decisions on what compatibility you need. We've created some nice visual tools to be able to help guide you through here. So we do understand there are sort of quite a lot of different version numbers and compatibility matrices assigned here for people to get their heads wrapped around.
Great. Thank you very much, Steven. Next up, we've prepared a little live demo for you where we will show you how to connect the hardware, how to set everything up in the QTM software, how to plot data in real time, and how to measure data. And as you can see on the right-hand side already, we'll be taking a look at some forearm muscles. But first of all, we'll have to make sure that all the hardware is connected correctly. So for that, I'll stop sharing screen here, and I'll ask you, Steven, to show us.
Great. So we're going to start off with the Delsys system and getting the Delsys system connected. So we start with a Trino base station. On the side of the Trino base station, we have either 3 connections. In this case, this is a digital only Trino base station. You may also have another variant where we have analog connections here at the bottom as well. But they all have the same power, USB, and trigger connector. So let's start by connecting the power to the Trino base station. When we connect the power, you should see any sensors that are docked inside the charging docks here to be able to illuminate, and we should see the indicator here that shows that it is powered and operational. Next step could be then to connect your USB, one side into the base station, one side into your computer. The final step from a Delsys hardware setup would be to connect the Delsys trigger module. So for those that are familiar with the Delsys trigger module, out the way. So the Delsys trigger module is this device here, and all we need to do now is connect the other end with the LEMO connector to the side of the base station. The trigger module has an on-off switch at the top, little flick switch, and you should see a little green indicator here in the top corner, which might be difficult to see on the camera, but it's illuminated, meaning that it's getting power from the Trino base station. At this point, this is largely all the hardware setup we need to do from a Delsys side. So we're just going to move this out of the way and now move on to the Qualisys setup. So today I have here on the desk a couple of Micus cameras, the M5 units. And we have, importantly, the camera sync unit, also known as the Micus sync unit. And so now what we need to do is start making the connections. So we'll get our power injector, which requires power that's connected into the mains power supply currently. Put that into our power slot. So we then need an Ethernet cable to go into the data port, with now the other end going into the computer. At this point then, we'll get another cable and plug this into where it says camera, plug it in the right way around. And of course, it's now asking us to plug this into the camera. Sorry, one moment. Just got my cables tangled up. So we get the other end, and in the rear of the camera, there are two ports saying data/power. And we'll connect that in here. At this point, we could daisy chain multiple cameras together, like Neil has indicated, or different camera types. And then the last camera in the chain can then go back and plug into the camera sync unit. In this case, I'm just going to connect one single camera like this. Now, the final step that we need to do for the camera sync unit is connect this with the Delsys trigger module. And in that case, what that allows us to do is have a hardware synchronization between the Delsys system and the Qualisys system. For that, we simply need a BNC cable. And it's a male-to-male BNC cable. We'll connect one end into the trigger module. And the trigger module has two different sides, a green side, a red side. Green means start. And then there's two sections, a top and a bottom. So we need to go into the top right-hand side, where it's a trigger input. On the Delsys trigger module, there's also a pulse polarity switch, which is quite hard to see on camera. It's a small white switch where you can change from being negative or positive or falling or rising edge for the TTL pulse. And by default, this should be set on to the negative or the falling edge. With the camera sync unit, we have two different options to have the synchronization with the Qualisys. We can either use the trig NO, normally open. In this case, we would have a Qualisys trigger button connected as well to provide the trigger to the start to both systems. Alternatively, today's demonstration, we're going to demonstrate the measurement time function. This is our synchronization pulse. So at this point, we should be ready to go, apart from my poor cable management now, live. But we have our Delsys system powered, connected to USB and to our trigger module. Our trigger module is then connected to the camera sync unit, which is then connected to the camera, which is connected to the computer and to a power unit. And I'm hopefully Niels can give me top marks for connecting my Qualisys system together.
Absolutely. Well done, Steven. That looks perfect. I mean, the one thing that I know is just variable. It's not wrong this way, but I think some customers tend to have the sync unit earlier in the chain. Quite often it's the first item, and because at that point you have power supply, you have the computer, and then often people connect the sync unit also directly at the desk, but that's no problem at all. I mean, you could have it anywhere within the camera chain, also in the middle, wherever it's most convenient from a cabling point of view. So with the hardware connections ready, we'll take a look at the software settings. So if we look at the QTM software, we have this gear icon here to bring up our project options. And if you've used the software before, you know that anything you can control and change within the Qualisys Track Manager software is controlled from here. And the topmost item are input devices. And here I will just say add device. And when we look at this drop-down list, you can see the second one here is the Delsys Trigno API. But just underneath, we also still have the Trigno SDK integration. So if you're using it like one of the legacy sensor types that Steven has just mentioned, then that's no problem at all. You just run the Trigno SDK integration just as before, and you will be able to collect data. And we'll maintain and test this integration as well for the time being until it's time to remove it. But for now, that is also available. So you have like sort of smooth transition here and are not forced to use a new one. But today we want to focus on the Trigno API. So I'll click OK and add. I'll check the box here to activate it. And when I do that, it's adding the EMGs section here, and I can click on Delsys Trigno API to see the details. And what we can see is that it's recognized the base station that I've connected. So I can see the ID and firmware version here. And I can then click scan and look for any sensors that I have activated. So if you are a Delsys user, you're familiar with this. And if not, then it's basically just taking out the sensor of the base station, tapping the magnet, and then the sensor is activated. And any of sensor that you have activated will show up here. It has detected one sensor, which is correct. I'll click OK. I can see the remaining battery life. I can see a name here. And I can see the mode and also the firmware version. Within here, I can also rename the sensor, and I can rename different channels, because in this case, it's a quattro sensor. So I'll just show it here. It's a quattro sensor with 4 sensors attached to different muscles. So because of that, this sensor actually has 4 channels with EMD data. So I can go into more detail later on if you like. But for now, we'll leave the default names here. I made a note of which one is which muscle, and in that way I can interpret the data. But in terms of studies, and if you have like a similar setup that you use all the time, I would recommend actually renaming the sensors here, because then whenever you open the file later on, you know exactly which channel is which sensor. Down here, we also have a box to select which type of synchronization mode we would like to use. And just like Steven showed, we've connected the output of the sync unit on the measurement time connector to the Delsys trigger box. And we also have the option, like in the old integration, to use a trigger, which means that we are splitting the trigger signal from a hardware push button like this. And we would basically then trigger both the EMG system and the camera system from the same trigger. But from my point of view, measurement time has some advantages, because it means you don't have to use the push button trigger, and you can also use other trigger methods like the keyboard, or you can trigger with our wireless trigger. And for that reason, I would probably go for the measurement time if I'm setting this up the first time. There's also an option to run without synchronization, which we don't recommend, because that basically means it's 2 pieces of software that are starting at roughly the same time, but we cannot control from a real sort of hardware perspective that the 2 data streams are aligned. But we think there are situations, maybe if you don't have a trigger unit available, or other reasons that you want to test something, that there may be advantages to run this, but you could have like several hundreds of milliseconds offsets using that. So let's stick to measurement time. Okay, so I'll click OK here, which will now save this in my project options. And when I start the preview, then I can go to View, Data Info, right click, and look at analog data. And then the 4 channels are showing up here. So what I can do now, I could say maybe I want to plot the first channel, which is basically a channel that is adductor for the fingers. It's the one that is located right here, the blue one, which is basically a hand muscle that is activated when I'm sort of pressing the fingers together. And I can see the signal coming up here. And I could do the same for the other channels here as well, but save a little bit of time and to also show you the functionality, I have used our window layouts to save a window configuration before. So I could now set up my own window layout and go here and say window layouts, save as, and save a window layout. But because I've done that already, I will simply open up the layout 1. I could also press Control-1 to save time. So it's a very convenient way to bring up a window layout like this, because this way you don't have to redo it every time. And what we always recommend to do first, no matter how you want to use the system, is to do a quick check of the signals. So in this case, I've got the first sensor, which is right here on my hand. And I can see if I'm sort of contracting the fingers, then that one is activated. The second sensor is the yellow one on my arm, which is one of the extensor muscles. So if I sort of apply some resistance on the top of my head, the top of my fingers, and push my fingers up, you can see the signal from that sensor. The third one is one of the finger flexors. So that signal seems to be a little weaker. I have to admit that I'm a complete beginner when it comes to palpating finger muscles. So I may have not placed that one perfectly, but we can still see the signal being activated when I'm pressing down or flexing the fingers. The last one is a finger, the abductor of sort of the pinky. So when I do this, you can see a really nice, strong signal on that one. There's just a very thin layer of skin covering that muscle. So I've been able to really get a nice signal there. Okay. So with all that tested and set up, I think I'll go back to our normal layout here. layout. Let's go back to the default capture layout so you can see what we've set up. And I will show you quickly what we have in terms of marker tracking. Because what we've done today is that we have applied our finger marker set. That's also something that we've released in the new QTM 2021.2 version. And what this does is that it basically has a skeleton definition, and where the skeleton are those sort of orange triangles that you can see. And it can be controlled for all the fingers individually. So what that means is that if you are interested in finger tracking, you now have a method sort of built into the QTM software directly to apply finger tracking. And all of these segments are tracked in 3 dimensions, obviously with some constraints to be able to actually track them in 3 dimensions. But if you're interested in any angles here, you can do some basic computations and get some basic outputs as well directly from the QTM software. When it comes to more advanced biomechanical modeling, we would always recommend a software like Visual 3D, where you have more control and you could have like more sort of variants of the finger model that you're using, but it is possible now to do this here. I'm doing this just with a partial model, only with my left hand, but of course you can combine it with a full body skeleton where you also have markers all over the body and then track the body skeleton as well. But what this allows us now, together with the Trigno integration, is to take a look at synchronized data from both systems. So maybe I'll zoom in a little bit here. And we can see in live preview the hand that is being tracked and the different EMG signals fully synchronized with this. You can see that I've stored a second window layout that we are currently looking at. And in that window layout, I've aligned the 3D window on the left-hand side with the EMG preview on the right-hand side. So let's make a recording. So I'll just click up here and say 5 seconds, that's fine. We'll remove the delay. I'll just start right away and get here quickly. And I can now go and, for example, spread out the fingers. And that's it already. So fairly short measurement. Okay, so there you go. We can take a closer look at this finger tracking. One function that I really like for this sort of measurement is to say, I want to follow a selected marker. So I've activated that. And then the advantage is that when the hand is moving around in 3D space, I'm able to actually follow the hand automatically, or not I'm following it, the software is following it automatically. And I can just go back to this window layout that I stored earlier, and I'll see the data that I've recorded. You can look at that synchronized with the finger movement here. So this is obviously just one example, but I think and I hope that this gives you a good idea of the possibilities of this integration. One small detail I would like to mention here is that, especially in live preview, it's good to know that we've recently added the possibility to set a fixed scale on these charts, because if we are in live preview, these are continuously updating the scale. And if you happen to bump an object with a sensor, for example, and you have sort of a movement artifact in them, the scale really goes up to very high numbers, and it doesn't go back until you start preview again. And to prevent that from happening, you can now click an activated window and then say edit in chart settings, and then enable a fixed scale for this channel. And this is stored with the window layout. So I think that's a very useful function for previewing EMG data in particular, so that you don't have that issue anymore with like the automatic scale. All right, with that, yeah, said, Steven, would you like to talk a little bit more about what we've just done and the sensor and the possibilities that we have here?
Sure thing. Do you want to unshare your screen and then?
Sure.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, I think what we tried to highlight in today's session is obviously the integration of kinematics and EMG together in one streamlined software solution, and in particularly so quite advanced technologies and advanced ways to capture. We understand that maybe a lot of users aren't interested in hand biomechanics, intrinsic hand muscles, but instead it paints an interesting picture to describe what is possible with these latest integrations of advanced multi-channel EMG sensors, such as the Trigno Quattro sensor, where these very small miniature heads can get into the interosseous muscles of your fingers, or to look at very small, delicate movements of your finger or your wrist by measuring the forearm muscles. In the same vein, we could do this in the neck or the face. We could study human emotion, or we could look at the intrinsic muscles of the foot, and lots of other types of similar applications. And so, yeah, so hopefully today has demonstrated this sort of rather unique application. And again, we understand and appreciate that most users might not be interested in this, but it does demonstrate the capabilities of what motion capture technology can do, and these multi-channel advanced EMG sensors like this as well at the same time. Yeah, so I think that was all I was going to possibly say here, Niels.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, like you said, this is what we show today is the workflow, and hopefully it's so easy that you need very little documentation to use it. But nevertheless, we would like to give you a quick overview of what resources we've got available, both on the Qualisys and the Delsys side. On Qualisys side, my first reference for me personally is always our user manual, and I really think that our support team is doing a great job there to keep our documentation up to date and relevant. So my first step when setting up a system like this, because I'm a bit old-fashioned, I like to read. I press just F1 in the software, and then I can just search for Delsys API, for example, hit enter, and I'll find the instruction on how to integrate and how to set up the integration. So it's basically very similar information to what we provided today, just in a written format. And in here, you will also find sort of up-to-date hardware requirements in terms of firmware versions and so on, because of course this will change over time compared to what we presented today. If you prefer recorded material and videos, we will make the recording of today's webinar available on the website. And we also have our Q Academy pages. So these are pages that contain various different videos. I think it's more than 100 by now, that show all different integrations and also basic functionality of the Qualisys camera system. And down here, you can see a little screenshot from the current Trigno Avanti manual or tutorial, focusing on the SDK integration. But just last week, the team around Daniel Bassett that does these videos was over here in Gothenburg and recorded the new Delsys Avanti API integration. So this will become shortly as well. And if you have questions on top of that, of course, you're also very welcome to contact our support team at support@qualisys.com, and also my personal contact details will be up on the next slide. Okay, Steven, how about the Delsys side when it comes to these things?
Yeah, of course, very similar to how you operate at Qualisys as well. I wanted to also highlight our educational resources and documentation that we have available on the website, Delsys.com. We have a lot of these educational more resources about EMG and how you could use EMG. In addition to that, we've just released this Trigno firmware guide. So this will be very helpful to navigate the different sensor types, different base station types, versions of firmware and USB drivers. So some of the information we presented earlier relating to the Qualisys integration, of course, this changes depending on how you want to use the system and your particular system setup. So I've created an interactive guide to guide you through this process. When you get to the end and you'll be told what configuration of software and firmware that you require, there's also embedded videos that are also hosted on the Delsys YouTube channel that guide you through the process of changing your firmware on your base station, your different sensor types, and also your USB drivers. We are looking to build more onto the Delsys YouTube channel with some new content throughout time, whereby we will give some more tutorials and insight into how you use our software and our systems in different applications as well. And very similar to Niels, we're always happy to hear from anyone through our support network. So support@delsys.com, or reach out to your own distributor or representative that you typically engage with as well.
Great. Thank you, Steven. Okay, with that, we are getting to the summary. And before we get to the summary, I would like to remind you to use the Q&A functionality if you have not done so already. I mean, this is a live webinar. We really look forward to your questions and to interact with your questions at any point. If you would like to ask anything about the webinar or anything else afterwards, you can also see our contact details here, both from myself and from Steven. To sort of summarize what we presented today, the Delsys API supports additional sensor types, like the Quattro that we demonstrated today, which ultimately allows you to cover more measurement situations. And I think that for many of you, that's one of the most important things about the measurement systems that you use, because of course you're not measuring for the sake of measuring something, but because of certain research questions or certain projects. And for that, I think it's always good to know which possibilities exists, and maybe, or I hope that we gave you some new ideas about what can be done with the different sensor types. You could also see that more settings can be controlled inside QTM directly. Maybe depending on what questions come up, we can take a quick look at that again later on, because you can now set different sensor modes directly in QTM. And more in general terms, the Delsys API is sort of the latest that Delsys have integrated, that Delsys have released. So by using it and supporting this in our software, we sort of future-proofed it for any new sensors that your team might come up with, Steven, because it will be a lot easier for us to integrate them in the future, because basically it's the latest platform, and I think that's what you are also using for some of your projects. So I already say thank you for joining us, but I do hope you stay on for a little bit and yeah, ask lots of questions. And I can see we already have some questions coming in here. One question is maybe best for you, Steven. Does the Delsys API require the use of the Trigno control utility while collecting data?
No is the simple answer. So this is one of the advantages, I think, with the API integration. What Qualisys have been able to do is take some of our core DLL files, integrate that into QTM and the installation of QTM, which that means then the handling of the Trigno system is all happening through QTM. There isn't a requirement then to use the Trigno control utility. And so I think as we, again, look at this future-proof solution, we'll look at offering more and more control elements inside QTM of what you can do with your Trigno system. But this is one of the advantages. It disassociates sort of our software compatibility along with Qualisys software compatibilities in terms of our release cycles of things. And so it is a more future-proof solution, I think, from that perspective as well.
Great, thank you, Steven. And I mean, just to connect to that, maybe I can show you, because you mentioned like that the Trigno control utility is no longer needed because there are more settings that can be done in the QTM software. And maybe just to complement that, I'll just bring up the settings again here. And you can see that for the Quattro sensor, for example, I have a drop down with multiple various modes here. So I can decide whether I would like to have IMU data included, and there are choice of different firmware, choice of different frame rates available that we can use when we're collecting data. And those modes differ depending on the sensor that you have connected, and you can then control it yeah, depending on the sensor type. Another thing that you can do here is that you can rename sensors. We didn't do that during a live data collection, but let's say maybe you have more sensors, then you can call, for example, this one left forearm, because it's on the left forearm. And you can see down here, the output names have changed. That's why it's highlighted in yellow, so that you're aware that if you are having any scripts to process the data, whether it's in a C3D file, MATLAB file, or text file, because all of these, of course, include the EMG data, and then the output name will change if you change this. But I can apply this. And I can also go in and say, well, actually, this first muscle, and I do have to look at my little list here to make sure I get this right, is the flexor carpi coronaris. And you can see once again, it has updated the output name. Now, if I think this name is a little bit too long, I can also say, I don't want to use the default name because actually, well, I know that this is on the forearm. So I can just shorten this a little bit and apply and save it. And then when I reconnect to the sensors, I can take a look at the data that I'm receiving. And you can now see that that first sensor has been renamed. So you can see that there's a lot of flexibility of things that you can control directly in the QTM software. There's one other question here referring to some dropouts when using the QTM integration. So sometimes it goes to 0 or it picks up some room noise. And I think that maybe, Steven, you can add something to that, but my feeling is that there could be a whole variety of reasons for that. And the best thing would probably be to contact our support, or we can also get back to you to get some example files and take a deeper look into this.
Yeah, I think it's Yeah, there'd be a number of questions that I'd want to come and ask this to be able to troubleshoot further. Like Neil said, I think I'm happy to try and go through this live, but I think without an interactive chat, really, I think back and forth on here becomes quite challenging. I think it'd be best to reach out to support@delsys.com and we can go through some troubleshooting steps. Both Qualisys and Delsys have our own systems. We've got Qualisys cameras and Qualisys have got Delsys systems. And so together as a team, we can really start to troubleshoot these things quite well now. Yeah, it'd be interesting. I think I would first default to look at the Trinio control utility. When this last channel does go to 0, what does that indicate? Is the sensor still showing up there? What sensor type is it? I assume this is with the SDK integration, not the API. Yeah, have you tried this in EMG Works? Does it work? So I could probably list another 10 different types of questions, but I really think this would be a lot better. We can have a one-to-one, either myself or the team in the US can sort of work with you on one-to-one to try and troubleshoot this. There's not any known issues or known bugs relating to what you describe here. So I'm sure it's just a small sort of setup change that we can have.
Great. Thank you, Steven. There's one question about legacy sensors. That's maybe just good to clarify. So does the API work for both legacy and Avanti style sensors?
So the API in general is really geared around our newer technologies, and so the Avanti style sensors. So this API integration would only support the Avanti style sensors, so Avanti itself or any other Avanti variants of that. The legacy sensors, you need to operate back with the SDK in our current integration platform. And the follow-up question was, is there any difference in the way one would operate them? Well, because it's through the SDK, then they're sort of largely going to remain the same functionality at that point.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's also good to emphasize again that for that exact reason, we didn't just kick out the SDK integration now, because we know that there are customers around who have legacy sensors. So we will keep and maintain the SDK integration. So there's really no change for you. And we have also received a question related to that. If someone, due to legacy sensors, continues using the SDK integration, is there any need to re-add the Delsys system? And I believe that's not necessary. I mean, you could see that it's been renamed from Delsys SDK to Delsys, or sorry, from Delsys to Delsys SDK Legacy. I'm fairly sure that you do not have to re-add it. I will double check with our support team just to be sure. And as always, I would, the first time after installing the update, maybe run a quick test. And in the worst case, you would have to re-edit and maybe enter some channel names again. But I'll check this with our support team, and I believe that it should stay in the system. Steven, another question that has come up more in general is about sensor types, because I know that there are quite a lot of sensors within the Avanti platform. So maybe you could give a quick overview. I mean, we looked at the Quattro sensor now. There's obviously the single channel Avanti sensor. Which other sensors do we now support with this integration?
Good question. You're putting me on the spot. I'm supposed to sort of list them out. The Trinio Avanti sensor, the Trinio Mini sensor, the Trinio Duo sensor, the Trinio Quattro sensor, and the Trinio Snap Lead EMG sensor as well are supported sensors from an EMG perspective. The only EMG sensors that we don't support in the API at the moment would be the Trinio Galileo sensor. And that was a decision we made because the Trinio Galileo sensor's application is around our EMG decomposition product. And to be able to decompose the EMG data captured from a Trinio Galileo sensor is required to go through some protocol and file storage perspectives that have to happen inside a Delsys' own software platform. So the Trinio Galileo will remain inside a Delsys platform at the moment until the decomposition algorithms, I suppose, open up to be possible with motion capture. However, we can have the same triggering setup, so we can still have a synchronization of the two systems working. It just means the Galileo sensor isn't streaming data into QTM. Currently, also the same could be said for the Trinio Maze sensor. So the Trinio Maze sensor is a 4x4 high-density EMG sensor that we've just released earlier this year. That is currently also not been streamed into Qualisys. Again, due to reasons about its application alongside motion capture. Primarily, this is better handled inside the Delsys software because it is offering the possibility of up to 256 channels of plotting of that data and sort of certain other processing we may want to perform on that EMG. So at the moment, that's kept inside the Delsys system. We're looking to, I suppose, based on user feedback, also increase support for our other biomechanical and physiological sensors. We haven't added every single sensor type of thing along the way because sometimes there isn't a great requirement or need to add this inside QTM. But from an EMG perspective, it is the Trinio Avanti, the Trinio Mini, the Trinio Duo, the Trinio Quattro, and the Trinio Snap Lead EMG sensor that we support. And yeah, I think we're looking at supporting the Trinio analog adapter and the Trinio FSR adapter going forward as well into our next release.
Yeah, perfect. I mean, sorry for putting you on the spot a little bit there. I did actually have a sneaky look into our user manual in the meantime here as well. And just to confirm, of course, it's those EMG sensors that you listed. We are also listing the analog input adapter as compatible, but I think the FSR is coming soon.
Yes.
All right.
But I think we're all we're willing for feedback, aren't we? I think as we sort of see the needs and the requirements, both companies are motivated towards supporting our users. And so if there is a need to support an additional sensor type, and as everyone probably sees and knows, we are on a constant development path at Delsys. And so as new sensors come on board, then they will be available foundationally inside the Delsys API, which means there is a possibility of moving that into QTM if the need arises as well. So please do get in touch and let us know how you're using the systems together or how you'd like to use the systems. And we value that type of feedback and interaction with our users.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's very good that you emphasize that because same for us. I mean, doing a new integration like this is very significant work. I think it is very hard to see from the outside how many hours, how many calls between Delsys and Qualys have gone into this, because it's also a learning process on our side. We are no experts on the Delsys latest sensors, but I can see that from my perspective, that has worked extremely good, and we are really grateful for that cooperation and to be able to provide and tackle a project like this, which is really a good foundation for the future as well. I can't see any more questions that we need to answer. So either you have to be very quick. Otherwise, I would like to thank you very much, Steven, for joining us today and for very much complimenting this webinar. We couldn't have done it without you. It's been very nice to have you here. Thanks.
Oh, thank you for the invitation, Niels. As always, it's very warm and nice, I think, to get together and to show our technology is operating and supporting our users. So thank you for the invitation and your time.
Yeah, thank you. And I would also like to thank anyone who's joined us today. And you can, of course, share the video afterwards with any colleagues who might not have been able to join. You will get an email within the next days with a link. And yeah, with that, thank you for joining. Thank you, Steven, and bye-bye.